When I was growing up, I lived in a small rural community in northern Pennsylvania. It was a community that did fall time perfectly. There were big piles of orange-colored leaves surrounding each home. There was that cold crispness in the air along with that wood smoke smell coming from your neighbor's fire pit. And all of our neighbors still waved at us from their porches. Even after I left home for college, I always made a point to go back home and spend Thanksgiving there with my family. That was one tradition that I did not want to miss out on. 3 years ago, I had an experience that changed the way I view Thanksgiving forever. I was home on Thanksgiving break for the long weekend, and I offered to go to the grocery store with my father to get a few last-minute ingredients for our Thanksgiving dinner the following day. My father remained home preparing the food, so I took my dad's pickup truck to my local grocery store, which has been around since before I was born. At the time, the day was still in the process of getting dark earlier than usual, and when I arrived at the store, it was very quiet. I saw only a few older people looking through canned goods, a teenager ringing people up, and an older gentleman in a dark coat wandering from aisle to aisle without taking anything. When I walked into the store, I noticed the man immediately. I don't know why, but his movements seemed so calculating. He moved slowly, as if he was trying to figure out everything he saw, all the people and everything around them. But there are always strange people in small towns, so I brushed it off. I slowly went through my list. Item 1 was cranberry sauce. Item 2, a bag of bread rolls. Item 3, all the spices. Item 4, a few baking items. And finally, item 5, a pie plate. After acquiring these, I headed outside to my truck. It was dark when I turned on the headlights and saw only 2 cars left in the parking lot. Mine and a dark SUV that I did not recognize. I threw my bags into the passenger side and climbed into my truck. There was no one else in sight around me. Everything was so quiet. Way too quiet. On my way home from the grocery store, I looked back in my rearview mirror and saw 2 bright headlights directly behind me. The car was so close to my truck, I could almost feel the dust and dirt from the pavement on my rear bumper. Since there was a long and empty road that leads from the grocery store to my neighborhood, with only a few turnoffs, I didn't get the sense that someone had any reason to follow so closely. When I realized I was being tailed, I decided to slow down slightly to see if the car would continue to follow me so closely. To my surprise, the car slowed down with me. I started to feel a knot in my stomach. 1 mile, 2 miles. Throughout this period, the headlights stayed the same distance behind me. As I approached my neighborhood, I saw the SUV slowed before I turned. It remained in place for a few seconds, with the engine running, but then commenced to slowly drive away. I told myself it didn't mean anything. It probably was just someone who lost their way, but as I drove home, I felt something ominous about the entire situation. Once inside the house, I was asked by my father in the kitchen why it took so long to get home, to which I responded jokingly, due to holiday traffic, and proceeded to bring in the groceries. However, the next item I looked at bothered me. One of the bags here was not mine. The items were precisely the same as mine. They were of the same brand and same size as well. The only difference was that they were sealed in new, tighter plastic wrappings. Additionally, inside the bag was a folded piece of paper that I did not remember being in my cart. I found this entire scenario surprising and perplexing. Was it possible that the cashier accidentally mixed my food items with someone else's items? Upon consideration, I determined that my own groceries were still wrapped securely, so it could not be a replacement bag. It was indeed a duplicate. Soon after, my father entered the room and observed the additional bag, and asked if I had purchased double items. I informed him that I had not. I noticed that the handwriting was very uneven, and it looked like the person pressed the pen down very hard, creating a zigzag pattern all over the note. It said, "Enjoy your dropping things. Be more cautious next time." The note did not have a signature. At first, my father laughed off the note, but once I told him about how I had been followed by that SUV, he became concerned and urged me to call the store to see if perhaps someone had followed me to see if I had taken their bag by accident. I called the store, and the cashier told me that nobody had reported missing anything and that no one had followed me outside the store. But he did say that the only person that was in the store at the same time as me was an older gentleman dressed in dark clothing. The cashier said the man left around the same time that I left the store. When I heard that, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The following day was Thanksgiving. My father told me not to worry and to relax, which I tried to do. However, I continually wondered what that older gentleman was doing, wandering through the store without making any purchases. Around noon on Thanksgiving Day, I went to the store so that we could return the extra groceries we did not use. But I noticed the bag containing the extra groceries was missing, not misplaced, moved, or anything like that, but completely missing. I searched through our kitchen, pantry, and fridge, but found nothing. Nobody, including my father, had touched it. We even checked outside to see if someone had mistakenly placed it in the back of the pickup. The one thing that remained was the folded piece of paper on the countertop, exactly where I had left it. During that night, I had a tough time falling asleep. Being in an old house that's silent makes it easy for the imagination to run wild. I kept hearing what sounded like someone walking around outside, or the sound of a car motor. There were even times where I opened up my blinds to see if there was a dark SUV parked on the side of the road, but as I looked out, all I found was silence. So, the next morning, I decided to head back to where I bought the groceries to clear my thoughts. When I got into my father's truck, I immediately felt something was off. As I sat in the driver's seat, I noticed a small white card that had been put under the windshield wiper. Before I could even touch it, I felt my heart sink to my stomach. The card was simple. It just read, "You didn't drop the bag this time." That was all it said. I showed the card to my dad, who immediately wanted to call the police. But what could we tell them? Someone bought groceries for us? Someone followed me home for a few blocks? Although we found the note very eerie and disturbing, it was not illegal. However, the feeling of being watched is a strong and persistent one. I left before I initially had planned to leave, drove back to my university, and looked in my rearview mirrors continuously along the way. For the next year, nothing else occurred. The following year, also on Thanksgiving, there was a package in my apartment mailbox. There was no return address and no markings on the package. The only thing written on the front was my name, in handwriting. But inside the package was the same groceries I purchased on that night. Every item was the exact as before. Same brand, same quantity, and they were all packaged in plastic and really crinkly. And there was a note. It was the same handwriting. "Still being careful." My entire body shuddered as I read this. I will be moving into my new apartment at the end of next month. This year, and next year, I will not be going home for Thanksgiving. 2 years back, my friends had persuaded me to go along with them on a trip to a cabin in the woods of Vermont for Thanksgiving. The trip was intended to provide us with a quiet and relaxing long weekend, consisting of delicious food, cold weather, board games, and the ability to build a fire every night. Given that I hadn't spent time with my friends because of work, this was going to be an ideal opportunity to reconnect with them. The four of us that were going, myself, Marcus, his girlfriend, and Drew, were all about the same age, in our early 20s, trying to avoid life, temporarily, by getting away for a few days. In the pictures, the cabin appeared cozy, an older wooden building surrounded by trees and featuring a large stone fireplace, rocking chairs on the front porch, etc. It seemed like a great setting for a Thanksgiving trip. After an afternoon drive and arrival at the cabin, there was one thing that stood out that was not included in the original pictures of the cabin. When we reached the front door, we noticed a note that was taped to it and was a bit crooked. The note only had 2 words on it: "Keep watch." All of us believed it to be a trick of rural humor or a Halloween decoration that had not yet been taken down. It did not register with us at the time as anything more than that. The first night was quiet. We took the time to unpack and make a simple meal, and played cards until we all grew tired. However, around midnight, we heard something we could not explain. We heard footsteps outside. Initially, we thought it was a person moving on the porch, but they sounded slow, deliberate, and their pace was steady and consistent. When Marcus muted the music, we were all talking at the time, and we fell silent when we heard the footsteps. The footsteps stopped. They started again, this time right outside the windows. Marcus looked through a small slit in the curtains and said he saw nothing, but we assumed it was maybe an animal of some sort, like a deer walking past the porch. But it is not possible for a deer to stomp the steps like that, and it is not at all likely for a deer to stop right by a window. After a while, the footsteps faded, and when it became quiet again, it felt safe and calm. After a while, we convinced ourselves that what we heard was caused from our nerves from the journey, travel fatigue, or perhaps because of a creaky porch, because of the temperature changing. We were all able to find humor in it. Around 2 a.m., we all decided to head to bed. From the bedroom on the first floor, I could see into the backyard and across a view of the trees. It should have been a calming environment. However, there was a strong sensation of someone watching me from around the corner. Feeling unsettled, I closed the curtains. At approximately 4 a.m., I think I must have fallen asleep, and then I woke abruptly to a sensation of something tapping against my window. I didn't think it was the wind or a tree branch against my window, but rather a hard tap. I could have sworn I heard 2 or 3 of them. I listened carefully and didn't hear anything else. I wanted to investigate, but was instinctively prevented from doing so. I would not say that I was afraid. Rather, I was following my natural survival instincts. The same kind of instincts that tell you not to walk towards a shadowed area in the woods. The next morning, I spoke with my companions. They each related to me their own thoughts of having heard noises similar to a human being walking in the woods during the early morning hours. We agreed to perform an inspection of the cabin area once we had enough sunlight. I had expected that we would find animal trail marks in the dirt and debris. What we found were foot tracks that belonged to a human being. The footprints were deeply impressed in the ground and encircled around the cabin 2 times or more. The human footprints were found in front of every window. What we found odd was that of these footprints, there was another trail. We couldn't necessarily identify the shoe size from the prints left behind. However, the manner of how the prints were spaced meant the individual who walked them walked slowly and purposely. We decided to not let it bother us. Perhaps the owner was coming to check out our cabin, or maybe a local had walked through. Regardless, it was unsettling. Thanksgiving Day came, and we decided to make the best of it with cooking, watching an old holiday movie, and relaxing. The air felt strangely cold after lunch, but the heater was working properly. However, it felt like something was out there, waiting for us. At around 7 p.m., we heard footsteps outside the porch for the second time. We both instantly recognized that it was not the sound of the house settling. All of us quickly went still in our seats without saying a word. Marcus took out his phone to video the footsteps, but the moment it was taken out of his pocket to start recording, they instantly stopped. There was an eerie silence in the air, the type of unsettling quietness that creates an uneasy feeling in your stomach. Drew suggested that we check the front door camera. There was not one on the cabin. However, earlier that day, Marcus had set up a motion-activated camera outside for the purpose of determining whether the footprints would show up again overnight. He accessed the app on his phone. He saw that there was something recorded. There was footage from 5 minutes before. In the recording, everything appeared to be empty on the porch. However, there were areas of the wood that were bending down, as if someone was walking across the porch step by step. Without a body being present, the wood would descend, compress, and then rise back to its original position, slowly. All of us unknowingly backed away from the door at the same time. None of us opened it. We congregated in the living room, completely at a loss as to what to do. None of us wanted to leave, but staying didn't seem to be an option. We finally reached a consensus that we would take turns sleeping, with 2 of us being awake at a time, and the other 2 being able to sleep, changing every couple of hours. It felt silly, but the camera footage provided motivation for doing this. I ended up being on the second shift with Drew, who was going to be awake with me. Around 3 a.m., Marcus and his girlfriend woke up Drew and I by tapping our arms and whispering loudly. Something was outside. We all heard it, breathing on the other side of the wall. This breath was almost continuous, as if it came from somewhere between the porch and outside at a slower rate than normal breath. The noise next was the creaking of something on the floorboards outside, then a strange, dragging noise on the side of our cabin. Drew kept watching the window. I don't think either of us did anything with the curtain. Neither of us spoke until the noises stopped. As soon as the sun was up, the 4 of us packed as fast as we could. No talk, no meals, just throwing things in the trunk. Marcus checked the videos for the last time before we left. There were several new ones. In one, the boards of the porch were bent, bending continuously, as if someone had walked around on them for several hours. Then, another clip showed the boards moving toward the door and lowering down. As we left, something caused me to turn around. In an upstairs window that none of us had touched or used, the curtain was slightly moving, almost like someone had been watching us at the moment we left and stepped back quickly. We returned the keys to the rental office, and the person at the desk didn't appear shocked when we brought up the fact that we had heard footsteps around the cabin. The woman didn't ask for any specifics about our experience. She simply nodded her head slowly, as if she had heard about the footstep noises before. When we asked if the piece of paper we found with the words, "Keep watch," on it was from the rental office, she said no, it was not. We did not ask her any further questions about it. The next day, when we left Vermont, On our way back home, the day after our trip, we had our last conversation about our vacation. Last week, while searching through the rental listings for another holiday trip, the exact same cabin showed up in the listing again. The same pictures of the outside porch, and the same photo of the front windows of the cabin. However, there was one new picture added to the listing. A picture showing the front door of the cabin. There was a piece of paper taped to this door. This piece of paper had the same words on it as before, but instead of saying, "Keep watch," it had the new words, "Keep watch close." I was a trail patroller at a small nature preserve that was open for public access to see the fall foliage over the Thanksgiving holiday week. My duties were primarily to monitor the trails and ensure hikers remained on the designated paths, and closing the gates to the trails each evening. It wasn't a demanding job. I received decent pay, and I appreciated working in a tranquil location. The nature preserve contained long wooden walkways, lined with tall pine trees, and it was much colder and windier than I had anticipated. Nonetheless, it was very serene and relaxing. The first night of my employment began at approximately 11 p.m. Since sunset began at 4:45 p.m., I took my flashlight, thermos, and an emergency radio from the maintenance staff with me. After I traversed the trail the first time, everything appeared normal. A scattering of leaves on the ground, branches swaying from the cooling temperature and evening winds, and the occasional sound of critters in the woods rustling about. On the second pass of my trail walking, I began to notice a subtle difference. There was a pair of footprints off the trail. The footprints weren't out of the ordinary. There are quite a few people hiking in this area, and it wouldn't be unusual for them to go off the trail. What made these footprints different was that they were incredibly deep, brand new, and heading straight toward the woods. This indicated that whoever made them had just stepped off the path moments ago. I yelled out to see if anyone heard me and might respond. Nobody answered me. I pointed my flashlight into the trees, but the light did not reach very far. The trees absorbed all the light like a big wall, so I couldn't see any movement. To stay within the guidelines of my department, I reported what I had found to my radio room. I then marked the spot where the footprints were found, and decided I would continue my patrol until I found evidence of an injured or lost hiker. It would likely be just a hiker who had left before I arrived. Around 30 minutes later, I arrived at the outer edge of the preserve, known as the Overlook. The Overlook was a large wooden platform with a railing that overlooks the vast views of the valley below. It was a very popular place for people to take pictures. As soon as I stepped onto the platform, I heard the wood creak and immediately felt the hair on my arm start to rise. On the railing of the platform, someone had placed something. It was a toy stuffed turkey, like you would see given away to kids in school around Thanksgiving. It was old, dirty, and worn on the edges. It was standing upright, facing the path, not the view of the valley. There was a small piece of paper pinned to it, with a tag attached. I thought it might have been a misplaced object, so I carefully picked it up to check its label. It read, Trail Marker 1, 7:12 p.m. I looked down at my watch. The current time was 7:14. The timing was unbelievable. I called in the markers to my supervisor. After a long pause, my supervisor finally said they had not put out anything similar to that. I was then instructed to bring it back so they could look at their log. Just as I was beginning to walk away from the observation point, I realized I was not alone. Another set of footprints had appeared behind me. Deep footprints, leading directly to the observation platform. I had not heard anything approach me. I had not heard any footsteps, or breathing, or anything at all. Suddenly, my flashlight went out. I began walking very fast. By the time I reached the middle of the trail, the winds had picked up and leaves were twirling all over the walkway like they were being sucked in from nowhere. The radio had static over it. When I thought it was going to be my supervisor, it was nothing but the sound of quiet breathing. Steady, slow breathing. The breathing was really close to the microphone. "Is someone there?" I asked as I stepped away from the side of the path and started moving toward the middle. The breathing stopped. A few moments later, after stumbling through the forest with only the dim light of the stars to guide me, I arrived at a little emergency shed. The purpose of this shed was simply to warm up your hands and check your gear. After entering the shed to warm up my hands and look at my equipment, I saw a conspicuously placed paper on an inside wall. I had no prior knowledge of this location. The paper contained the following words: Trail marker 2, 7:38 p.m. The watch I wore at the time read exactly 7:38, eerily synchronized with the paper. I did not want to jump to any conclusions, but I was beginning to feel as if whoever this was traveling much faster than me through the reserve and placing these markers right before in locations that he knew I would go to. This individual left no evidence of their presence until now. The forest I was in was eerily quiet now, without a single insect buzzing or animal chirping. There wasn't even a leaf blowing in the breeze. In fact, the lack of noise or any movement in the forest left me with a sense of extreme unease. Carefully opening the door and shining the new flashlight I acquired from the shed down the path ahead, I did not initially see anything strange. However, once I angled the beam of light down, I found fresh footprints again. I followed these footprints until they led me to a gate entrance at 8:10 p.m. I was instantly flooded with emotions as I spotted a second object on the ground. Standing upright like a long-forgotten stuffed turkey, this old and dusty toy looked as though it had been left behind by someone in a hurry. The label attached to it read, Trail marker 3, 8:10 p.m. Just like the previous item, it was right on time. There was no doubt. Someone was following, or rather, anticipating my every move. There were numerous tracks, clearly marked on the ground in a perfect circle around the second marker. Disturbed, I looked over my shoulder and found new tracks leading all the way up behind me. They were deep and the same size as the ones I thought I was following. I came to the shocking realization that the person that had followed had been right behind me. I had never once heard them approach or heard them leave. I left this marker and continued walking without stopping for any additional markers. As I approached the visitor booth, I noticed that someone had left it open for me. This booth was not open to the public at these hours, and there was no one else working. It would have had to have been opened without a key. The visitor booth was dark. When I stepped into it, I stopped in place. On the counter sat a third stuffed turkey, its head hanging down to one side, appearing as though it were watching the entrance door. A tag was attached to the turkey. It wasn't a trail marker this time. It was simply a note that read, "You were late." It was 8:27 on my watch. I carefully backed away from the booth and radioed the supervisor a second time. Instead of static like before, a light tapping sound was in the background, possibly from someone tapping on a piece of clear plastic. Then I heard the sound of breathing again. I turned off the radio and hurried over to my vehicle, which was parked near the visiting booth. While approaching my car, I noticed something on the hood of the vehicle, resting just above the front of the car. Yet another stuffed turkey toy. The final one. I did not pick it up. After getting in my car and locking the doors, I drove away at a speed too fast for safety. But I didn't care. I had to get away. Later that night, I sent an email to my boss informing her of my resignation. A week later, they reposted that same seasonal job opening with the same previous advertisement, the same written job description as before, and also the same photo from the cabin located at the entrance to the trail. But there was something different with the advertisement this time. In the photo, I noticed an image of a stuffed turkey toy visible from the cabin's window. An image of the stuffed turkey toy staring back at me, wanting to be picked up and taken home. My Thanksgiving in 2021 was supposed to take place at my cousin's in Washington State. The distance was quite far from where I live in Oregon. This was supposed to be a peaceful and inspirational trip while I traveled alone, where I could enjoy the autumn colors, empty highways, and clear my mind before the long weekend. My cousin's house is located about an hour away from Olympia in a small rural community. The sections of the road leading into this portion of the state are wooded and become dark before one would normally expect because of the dense forest that surrounded these areas. By 5 p.m., the darkness had settled in deep. I was not concerned by this, as I had previously made this drive a couple of times before. After an hour into my drive, my GPS indicated that it was rerouting me due to the holiday traffic that I would encounter on my route. The house looked relatively open, but I had not seen any other vehicles since leaving my house around 4 p.m. The detour that my GPS took me on went through an unmarked and hardly traveled route that I had never been on before this trip. As the road appeared to be paved and well maintained, I continued to follow the previously provided route. After about 10 minutes, I saw something that caught my attention. It was an unusual decoration that was located under a tree line. A scarecrow with a turkey painted onto its shirt. One would have assumed it would have been put there for a Thanksgiving celebration. At least, that was the only logical explanation I could think of. Although I was not fearful of the decoration, I was surprised to find it there. There was nothing but deserted forest around me. There were no houses, farms, or any other signs of human life. And in the middle of that nothingness was a single, unremarkable scarecrow standing on the side of the road. I ignored it. As I drove further, I began to pay more attention to the scarecrows. I nearly wrecked my car when I noticed them. Scarecrows were everywhere, every few hundred feet apart, and they all stared down the road, appearing as if they were gawking at anyone driving past. The only difference among all these scarecrows was their distance from the road and their size. Some were short, others tall. One was missing an arm. Another had a lopsided hat. They all bore the turkey symbol somewhere on their bodies. After seeing 6 or 7 of them, I started to feel uneasy. I pulled out the GPS again, but it continued to inform me that this was the fastest route. By this time, it was around 6:30 p.m., and the fog was starting to get thicker, making it difficult to see more than a short distance. The road appeared like a tunnel, filled with white. My high beams were of little help cutting through the mist. And then I saw a large object lying on the road, close to where my car was headed. I slammed on the brakes. When I got close to it, I noticed it was a bundle of hay. It was tightly compressed and formed in the shape of a curled-up person. At first, I thought it was something that had fallen off a trailer. I had an epiphany as I spotted the painted turkey image on the edge of the bundle, an image that matched those of the larger-than-life scarecrows I had seen along the country roads in this area. The bundle had shifted slightly. There was no hint of an animal movement inside. Rather, it felt as though something large had just settled into place after being suddenly displaced. Even if it had been an animal, I would not have left my car. Nothing, and no one was going to force me into a pitch-black area surrounded by dense forest. I took a wide detour to avoid it. When I looked in my rearview mirror, the bundle had completely vanished. There was not a trace left behind. No drag marks. No visible tracks. It simply disappeared. This was when I decided to turn off my GPS unit and attempt to find my way back to the main highway. This was not going to be easy. I had no service, and with the fog, there was no visible intersections. As I continued driving, the road became bumpier and curvier. The asphalt was only partially maintained, with many large cracks and an accumulation of fallen leaves, which scraped against the belly of my vehicle. The woods around me were shifting. Then, just a couple of minutes later, I spotted something enormous directly in the center of the road that appeared in my headlights. A gigantic scarecrow. It was the biggest one I had ever seen in my entire life, and it was blocking my way. I slowed down to take a better look, but I felt the greatest instinctual urge to stay away from it. As I passed it on my left while driving, my headlights illuminated the legs of the scarecrow. It looked as if it had been placed there just before I got there. I began racing down the road. The fear and adrenaline had me frantic for about 10 minutes. Finally, I got to a stretch of road where there was no more scarecrows and no more symbols, just an endless fog and trees on both sides. At last, I saw a sign ahead. It was a reassuring symbol that humanity and civilization were to be found ahead. When I got a good view of the sign, I tensed back up. The sign did not have directions on it. The sign did not state the mileage to our destination. This sign had a message written in dark blue paint. These eerie markings read, "You passed it." My gut told me that I had to leave the road right away. Frantically, I continued driving past the sign and down the road, being careful not to go too fast to crash into the trees, but traveling much faster than I should have been. Around 7:50 p.m., I saw the glow from a streetlight. A few minutes later, the fog began to clear up. I got a notification from my cell phone that I had regained service. The road felt like it was becoming smoother, and the road I knew began to appear before me. I pulled into a gas station that was very well lit. I was glad to be back to my senses and was grateful for the comfort of being able to breathe calmly again. While I sat, parked in the parking lot, recovering from what I just went through, my cousin called me to find out where I was. I told them I was going to be late, because I was due to arrive at her house a few hours ago. When I told her the way I traveled, she seemed puzzled. She said the way I had gone did not exist to the public, and I could not have gone there except by driving through private forests. About a week later, due to my curiosity, I looked at my phone's GPS history. During the detour, my location pin had ceased to update. Prior to the strange road I took, the last recorded location was when I got off the highway. Everything after that was completely blank. There was no GPS record, no timestamp, just a gap. If this was all there was to the story, it would be easier to convince myself that the gap was due to stress, or that I was imagining things. A few days later, after I returned home, I received a small padded envelope that had no return address. It was in a small patch, stitched by hand. A design I recognized immediately a turkey symbol, the same symbol that had been painted on nearly every scarecrow, the same symbol that was found on the hay. Also included with the patch was a note. The note was not handwritten, but was stamped. "You were supposed to stop."